Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel. Get ready for heart-touching stories. Don't forget to subscribe and let's begin.
My older brother Marcus got a perfect SAT score. My sister Danielle graduated valedictorian. And me, I failed ninth grade English twice and once set the garage on fire trying to build a potato cannon. If you were placing bets on which one of the Ellison kids was going to make it, you would not have put money on me. Neither would my parents. Neither, if I'm being completely honest, would I. But here's the thing about being the dumb one in a smart family: nobody watches you. Nobody expects anything. And when nobody expects anything from you, you're free to do the most dangerous thing a person can do. You're free to try. The report card that started everything. I was 12 when my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and slid my report card across the formica like it was evidence in a trial. Two D's, a C minus, a note from my math teacher that said, in handwriting so careful it felt cruel, Jordan does not apply himself. Marcus was in the living room, already deep into some advanced placement textbook, the kind with equations that looked like alien languages. Danielle was on the phone with her debate coach. My father stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, wearing the expression of a man who had been deeply, personally let down by God. "What is this?" my mother asked. I didn't have an answer. The truth, that school felt like wearing shoes on the wrong feet, that every class moved too fast and covered things I didn't care about, that my brain went somewhere else when teachers talked and I had no idea where it went, felt too complicated and too embarrassing to explain, so I shrugged. And in my family, a shrug was a confession. From that night forward, I was the project. Every dinner became a tutoring session. Every weekend had SAT prep books stacked on my bed like a paperback prison. Marcus tutored me in math with the barely concealed impatience of someone who couldn't understand why anyone would struggle with something so obvious. Danielle once told me with genuine sympathy that she thought maybe I was just more of a hands-on learner. She meant it kindly. It still stung. My father never said I was stupid. He was a careful man who chose his words like he was diffusing something. But he said other things. He said I needed to find my lane. He said not everyone was built for academics. He said there were good careers and trades, and he said it in the tone people use when they're lowering your expectations gently, like letting air out of a tire so the blowout doesn't hurt as much. My mother just worried. She worried out loud constantly, the way some people hum. "What's going to happen to you, Jordan? What's your plan? Your brother already has an internship lined up. Your sister's looking at law schools." What was my plan? I was 15. My plan was to figure out why my potato cannon kept misfiring. The basement years here is what no one in my family understood. I wasn't not thinking. I was thinking constantly. I just wasn't thinking about the things school wanted me to think about. I was thinking about systems, not in any formal way. I didn't know that word for it yet. I just noticed things. I noticed that the corner store near our house always ran out of certain drinks on Thursday afternoons, right when the high school let out, and that the owner never seemed to connect that pattern to a restocking schedule. I noticed that my mother spent 45 minutes every Sunday clipping coupons for groceries that often weren't the best deals once you accounted for the drive. I noticed that Marcus, for all his brilliance, spent 3 hours every morning deciding what to wear because he never built a system for it. I was obsessed with gaps, places where something obvious was being missed, places where a small adjustment would make a big difference. When I was 16, I started buying things at garage sales and reselling them online. Nothing dramatic: old video games, vintage sneakers, electronics that just needed a reset. My parents thought it was a hobby. My father called it playing around on the internet. I made $3,400 my junior year of high school, which was more than Marcus made at his prestigious unpaid internship, though I had the good sense not to point that out. The summer before senior year, I talked 3 friends into helping me run a pressure washing business. I printed flyers, set prices, scheduled jobs, managed the money, and handled every customer complaint. My friends showed up and held the hoses. By August, we made over $18,000, and I paid them each more than minimum wage and pocketed the rest. I didn't think of it as business. I thought of it as solving an obvious problem: people with dirty driveways, me with a machine and time, and following the logic wherever it led. My father saw the money and said, "You should put that toward college." I said, "What if I used it to start something?" He looked at me the way people look at someone who's just said something in a foreign language. Then he said, "Jordan, let's be realistic." College? Question. I went to college. A state school, not the kind with a name people recognize at dinner parties. Danielle was already at Georgetown. Marcus was at MIT. I drove 3 hours to a campus where no one knew my SAT score or my brother's GPA or the story of the garage fire, and for the first time in my life I felt like I could breathe. I lasted 2 semesters in the business program before I switched to something called interdisciplinary studies, which my mother described to her friends as a little bit of everything in the tone she used to describe a dish that hadn't quite turned out right. What it actually was for me was permission. Permission to take computer science classes, psychology classes, urban planning, supply chain logistics, behavioral economics. I wasn't building a major, I was building a map. A map of all the places where human behavior created inefficiencies, and all the places where the right tool, the right system, could close the gap. Junior year, I dropped out. I know, my mother cried. Not figuratively, actual tears on the phone for 40 minutes. My father went quiet in the way that meant he had feelings too large to fit into words. Marcus sent me a long, considered email about the statistical relationship between educational attainment and lifetime earnings. Danielle called it a phase and said she hoped I'd come back to it. None of them asked what I was going to build. Building in the dark, I moved into a two-bedroom apartment with a friend named Priya who was also dropping out, also building something, also tired of waiting for permission to start. We split the rent and shared a Wi-Fi password and spent 6 months arguing about everything: markets, users, pricing, whether people would actually pay for what we were making. What we were making was a platform for small logistics companies, the kind of businesses that move goods locally. The kind that were being crushed by the Amazon-shaped shadow falling over every industry. Think a family moving company, a small freight operation, a regional food distributor. These businesses were bleeding money on inefficient routing, lost hours, miscommunicated schedules. They couldn't afford enterprise software. They didn't have IT departments, but they had phones and they had drivers and they had customers who needed things moved from here to there. We built them a tool. A simple, durable, affordable tool that did three things really well: scheduled jobs, tracked drivers in real time, and automatically sent customers updates so they stopped calling the office every 20 minutes. I called it cargo flow, which I now know sounds like a medical condition, but we were 21 and just needed a name. The first year we had 11 clients, small companies, a moving business in Columbus, a flower distributor in Atlanta, a regional medical supply company that became our most important early customer because they had complicated needs, and when we met them talked about us to everyone they knew. I ate a lot of rice that year. I drove a car that made a sound like a dying animal every time it rained. I did not go home for Thanksgiving because I couldn't afford the gas and was too proud to ask my parents for money. My father called in February of that year and asked how things were going. Slow, I said, which was true, but I think we're onto something. Jordan, he said, and I could hear 20 years of careful worry in the way he said my name. What's your backup plan? I told him I didn't have one. The moment things change, the thing about building something real is that the turning point almost never looks like a turning point when it happens. It just looks like Tuesday. My Tuesday was a call from a woman named Sandra Acaffer, who ran operations for a mid-sized regional grocery distribution company in the Southeast. She'd heard about us from the medical supply company. She had 47 drivers, 3 warehouses, and a routing system that was, in her words, built on spreadsheets and prayer. She wanted to see a demo. I gave her the demo on a laptop that kept overheating. I sweated through my shirt. Priya sat off camera holding a desk fan pointed at the laptop to keep it from shutting down. Sandra signed a contract 3 days later. It was the largest deal we'd ever closed, and Sandra, it turned out, knew everyone. Within 8 months, she had referred us to 11 other companies. Revenue that had been a flat line went vertical. We hired 3 people, then 8, then 20. We moved out of the apartment into an actual office, which felt so absurd that I took a photo of the door with our name on it and stared at it for 10 minutes in the parking lot. Venture capitalists started calling. I'd heard about VC funding, of course, but it had felt as abstract as winning the lottery, something that happened to other people, people in different cities, people who'd gone to different schools, people who hadn't failed ninth grade English twice. The first meeting I took was in San Francisco. I wore the nicest outfit I owned. I told our story: the small businesses, the inefficiency, the gap, the system, and the partner across the table leaned back and said, "You know what I like about you? You don't sound like someone who read about this problem. You sound like someone who lived next to it." I thought about the corner store with the empty shelves every Thursday. I thought about my mother's coupons. I thought about all those years of noticing gaps that nobody else was looking at. I did, I said. We closed our Series A 6 weeks later. The check the Series B process was different. By then we had real revenue, real clients, real data. We had a story that didn't need much decoration. The numbers told it. We sat across from rooms full of partners who asked hard questions and harder follow-ups. And I answered everyone because I had built the thing they were asking about in every detail, and I knew it the way you know something you made with your hands. The term sheet came on a Wednesday, $47 million. I sat in my car after the call and didn't move for a while. Not because I was processing the number exactly. We'd been working toward this for 3 years and I knew it was coming, but because of what I was going to do next. Because of who I was going to call. I called my mother first. She answered on the second ring, which she always does because she still worries, probably always will. We closed our funding round, I said. Oh good, she said in the voice she used when she didn't quite know what I was talking about. How much? I told her. There was a silence on the line that I had never heard from my mother before. My mother does not do silence. Silence in her vocabulary is a kind of failure, a gap to be filled with words and worry. But she went quiet for a long time, then she said, "Jordan." "Yeah, ma, $47 million. Yeah, another silence. "I'm going to have to call you back," she said, and then she hung up, and I sat there in my car and laughed until my eyes watered. The dinner they threw me a dinner. My parents, Marcus, Danielle, a few aunts and cousins, my grandmother, who is 91 and does not fully understand what I do, but told me at the table that she always knew I'd be rich because I had hungry eyes as a baby. Marcus gave a toast. He's a good man, my brother, I want to be clear about that. He's brilliant and decent and he works hard, and the fact that we were cast as rivals in our childhood wasn't really his fault. He stood up with his glass and said, "I'll be honest. I spent a lot of years thinking Jordan was the one we needed to worry about. He paused. Turns out Jordan was the one we should have been watching. People laughed. I laughed. My father waited until everyone else had gone to find me on the back porch. He's a quiet man who expresses love through proximity. He'll just come stand near you when he has something to say, close enough that you understand something important is happening. He stood next to me for a moment, looking out at the yard. Then he said, I underestimated you. I'm proud of you, not I knew you could do it. He said, I underestimated you, which from my father was more honest and more meaningful than either of those things. It was an admission, it was an apology, it was the most vulnerable thing I'd ever heard him say. You weren't wrong to worry, I told him. It was a real risk. He said, I was wrong. There's a difference between worrying about a risk and not believing in someone. I didn't believe in you. And you didn't need me to, but I should have. We stood there for a while after that, the way men in my family do, side by side, not looking at each other, letting the important things settle. What I actually learned, I want to be careful here. Because I've read enough of these stories to know how easy it is to wrap them up in a bow that makes the whole thing feel inevitable. I always knew. I never doubted. I followed my instincts and look where it led. That's not true. I doubted constantly. There were 6 months in the early days when I was so broke and so tired and so convinced I'd made a catastrophic mistake that I drafted an email to my father asking for money to come home. I never sent it, but I wrote it. What I actually learned, what the slow, unglamorous years of building taught me was this: being underestimated is a resource. When no one expects anything from you, you have nothing to protect, no reputation to manage, no image to maintain. You can try things that look foolish because everyone already thinks you're a little foolish. That freedom is genuinely rare and genuinely valuable, and most people don't realize they have it. The things that looked like failures were load-bearing. Failing ninth grade English twice meant I knew how it felt to not understand something, which made me better at explaining our product to people who weren't technical. Getting rejected from better colleges meant I went somewhere no one tracked my progress or expected my pedigree, which meant I built my first businesses without anyone watching. Being the dumb one meant I developed a habit of looking for what I was missing, which turned out to be the exact right habit for finding market gaps. Nobody's wrong about you, they're just working with old data. My parents weren't lying when they were worried about me. Based on the evidence available, the grades, the dropped courses, the dropped out college, the apartment with the overheating laptop, their concern was rational. What they couldn't see was the work happening underneath the surface, the compounding of small bets and quiet lessons and patterns noticed and systems built. By the time the $47 million check arrived, I'd been building toward it for 15 years. They just hadn't been able to see the construction, and last, the potato cannon was worth it. Every weird, oblique, impractical experiment I ran, the garage sale reselling, the pressure washing business, the obsessive study of inefficient systems was load-bearing. None of it looked like business school. All of it was. Now Cargoflow has 340 employees. We operate in 22 states. Last year we processed over 4 million logistics jobs for small and mid-sized companies that would otherwise have been squeezed out by platforms built for enterprises that don't look like them. My father retired early. I had nothing to do with that. He worked hard all his life and earned it himself. But I bought my parents a house because I could, and because my mother spent 40 years worrying about me, and the least I could do was give her a place where she could worry more comfortably. Marcus built something impressive of his own, a research position at a university he loves, doing work that genuinely matters to him. Danielle made partner at her firm. We are all by any measure fine, but sometimes at a board meeting or a conference or a dinner where someone introduces me as a tech founder and watches to see if I'll act the part, I think about that kitchen table, the report card sliding across the formica, my mother's face, my father in the doorway. And I think about how close I came to believing them, how close I came to accepting the lane they'd picked out for me, the version of myself that fit the evidence they had. I think about the moment I chose not to. It didn't feel brave at the time. It just felt like the only move I had left, but sometimes the only move you have left is exactly enough. Jordan Ellison is the co-founder and CEO of Cargoflow. He lives in Atlanta with his dog Margin, who is also relentlessly underestimated.